For our first panel, the infinite evolution of privacy and data flow policies. As you all know very well, the EU is now a global leader in data protection laws, for better and for worse. It's become a global, the GDPR itself has become a global cornerstone, and it can lead to fines of up to 4% of a company's global turnover. So it is genuinely serious business. With the GDPR, companies have to comply with a long list of requirements that have been decided democratically by our policymakers, what data to collect, how to manipulate it, how to store it, how long for, etc., etc. Add to that EU-US data transfers have also become tricky since the EU-US Privacy Shield has been invalidated by the European Court of Justice 2 years ago. A solution is in the making, but it's in the making. And what companies need is clarity. So to explore this, 4 years later, where are we at with data protection rules? Did any opportunities arise from this new legal framework? And how can direct selling companies make the most of these rules? I would like to invite on stage, first of all, online, joining us, Axel Tandberg, Chair of the Legal Affairs Committee at FEDMA, the Federation of European Data and Marketing, who will tell us about what it looks like for all sectors. Welcome, Axel.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And joining me here physically on stage, Savvina Papadaki, Advisor on Digital and Consumer Policy at Eurocommerce, the European... Please, the European Association for Retail, Wholesale, and Other Trading Companies, who will look at things from a retail angle. And last but of course not least, Laurent Servais, Director of Global Privacy at Nuskin, and you will tell us about the vantage point from a specific direct selling company. So welcome to you three, and thank you for accepting to join us for this exciting panel. Can we make sure your mic works? Can we? Sure. Yes, great. Sounds like it does. Savvina, can you try again?
I don't. Yes, it does.
Yes,
I
great.
Guess, right? Okay.
A little more volume on Savvina's microphone, please. So what is the picture today? Let me start with our friend Axel, who will tell us about the picture globally in Europe. Axel, what's the picture like in Europe for privacy and data flows?
Well, it's quite interesting if you say globally in Europe, because it's sort of a contradiction in terms, but in the same time, in Europe, we are actually looking at the data protection and data in general as a thing for the individual to take care of, because we have in the legislation in Europe always, last few years, concentrating that we stem it from the individual, from the little person, to protect the little individual towards the big companies. And that's what you can say is the GDPR. If you look at it upon it, it's looking always from the individual, because as we know, it's the individual who owns the data. We can only borrow it and they lend it to us, and therefore we must ensure that we do it in the right, correct manner.
Right.
That you can say contrast, in a sort of, if you compare it globally, if I'm...
Yes, go ahead, please compare it globally. That's what I was about to ask for.
Yeah. Yes, if you compare it globally, you can look at the US, where most legislation, especially data privacy legislation, are focusing out of the viewpoint of a company, how a company can use data, and et cetera, et cetera. So you basically are looking for how can I best use the data as an entrepreneur or as a company. And then we have a third party playing around with this, is actually China and to some part Russia these days, where actually the main party here is how the state can use the data. So we have three different legislative movements moving around in the world, as you could say.
And would you say that one framework is better than another?
It depends on which angle you come from, because for us as individuals, I think the European way is much better. But for a company, I think it surely much be easier to be working from the US version. But the best part, it would be sort of a mix of the two.
Okay, all right, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic there.
Yeah.
A bit too wet, okay.
Iceland.
Iceland, all right. Savvina, that's the big picture for Europe. What is the big picture for retail specifically?
You can hear me, right? Sorry, because I wasn't sure if it's working. So thank you for the invitation, first of all. So when it comes to retailers and wholesalers, it's a sector that is collecting a lot of personal and non-personal data. Is one of the, data is very important for the sector. They are being used for different things to offer better services to customers, but also, have the address of the customer helps to deliver the product, for example. So they are essential to the everyday activities of retail and wholesale. For the sector, it's also very important to handle this data with trust and transparency and to process them in a secure way. So in Europe at the moment, all retailers and wholesalers are handling a vast amount of data, personal and non-personal, in a very transparent and secure way. The complex regulatory, let's say, framework that I have to navigate through every day has become even more complex during the last few years. We have the GDPR, which is nowadays, the blueprint for handling and processing personal data, not just in Europe, in the EU, but also for the whole world. We have a couple of legislations that we are awaiting, like the e-privacy regulation, but also a lot of different, let's say, issues that have become quite important, like decisions from the data protection authorities in Austria, in France, related to the use of different tools that they're handling personal data. So,
for example, Facebook.
For example, or Google Analytics.
Or Google Analytics. Yeah.
So, as it is right now, it's a pretty complex, let's say, framework that they have to work in. But for the GDPR has helped them, let's say, offer a framework of trust, which is paramount for retailers and wholesalers, to have the trust of the customers, of the users of their services. Okay. Because that way they can count on them and have long-lasting relationships.
All right. Savvina, you at Eurocommerce, so Eurocommerce represents the retail sector here in Brussels, and it lobbies EU institutions transparently and democratically, as many others here in Brussels, so that the policies adopted are compatible with the retail sector's interests. You say, so you're very well positioned to see what EU policies are like and what they imply for the sector. You're saying that currently there's a great amount of complexity. Can we hope for more simplicity in the next 5 or 10 years?
That's a good question. I think that's what everyone hopes for. So yes, I should probably have said that at the beginning. I'm so sorry. So we are obviously representing 27 national associations and over 5 million companies of different sizes, large leading players, but also small and medium-sized businesses. So it's also a broad membership. When it comes to the if things will become less complex, one discussion that it was ongoing for many years now regarding the e-privacy regulation is the fact that in some areas it's not always aligned with the GDPR, for example. So companies have invested a lot of time and resources to be compliant with the general data protection rules, and they have come into a point where this is just, as I said, a blueprint. So if we have another legislation now for online communication, I don't know if we can say that things are going to be less complex. Okay. But we wait and see. Okay,
so we expect the same level of complexity for the near future.
I mean, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but we wait and see, and hoping that the final text follows the GDPR and adds in certain cases that they're necessary.
All right, thanks. Laurent, what do things look like from Nuskin's perspective? You are at the receiving end of all these regulations, like many in this room, and you're the chief privacy officer. Can we say that? Yeah. So
it's a piece of cake, obviously.
yeah, that makes sense.
Things have never been simpler.
Yeah.
And so that's detrimental to all our lawyers because they're out of a job really soon.
Yeah. Terrible.
It's it's difficult. I mean, the direct selling industry is complex. Depending on your business model, you may have distributors who act as resellers and or agents. They may have their own customers. They may do their business either the more traditional way of home parties, or they could be active online. They could be active on social media. We heard it, so the business is complex. Then on top of that, you add GDPR rules, which we briefly mentioned, which are also difficult. I mean, discussions, and for those familiar, defining who is the controller of the data, who is the data processor, is that your brand affiliates, or is that you? Or in case of a group on Facebook, is that a joint controllership between, well, the company and Facebook and or the brand affiliates? These questions are extremely difficult.
Exactly, and so those terms you're using there were defined by the GDPR when it was adopted 4 years ago, and it's all about what are the pipes through which the data flows.
So those concepts existed before under the directive, but they're becoming much more important. Now, on top of that, you add what Axel just said. There's different conceptions of privacy. So Europe, it's really much a fundamental right protecting the individuals. Now, go to the US, well, that sounds pretty much like a strange concept. Now, 4 or 5 states, started having privacy rules. We think about CCPA especially, but I think Connecticut is also about to adopt a new privacy legislation. But still, that means that you have, 45 states without any specific legislation. And then if you also operate in Asia and in China, then how do you cope with those different conceptions of privacy? So not only is the business model extremely complex, are those rules complex? But, if you need to comply globally, and we heard yesterday, I think it was Melanie saying, well, we really want to be global, we want to operate in the same fashion throughout, so our distributors, can basically, do their business wherever they want, however they want, the rules will be the same. How do you make this happen at the company level? So no, it's a struggle, it's difficult.
So at Nuskin, how do you cope?
Well, how do we try to cope,
Yes.
I'll say. We started working when GDPR, was announced in 2016, really 17. We started working on it, and back then we thought it doesn't really make sense for a European region, because the company is American, to implement a local program. We need to really work on a global privacy program, and so back then the decision was made, like many companies did, to use the most strictest framework, and to try to translate it globally. One thing which is important is to stop talking about GDPR, because otherwise that's a European thing. Now, so we really talk about privacy at Nuskin. And so we designed a privacy policy, which is a global policy that we really try to implement globally, that doesn't use GDPR wording. It may be inspired by GDPR, but we stop using those words, GDPR, when we do it globally. So that's the one thing. The second one, because drafting a policy, it's simple, it's about raising awareness. And this is where the struggle really lies, because again, conceptions are completely different if you are in Europe, or in the US, or in China. And I had a great discussion yesterday about the First Amendment, which really opened my eyes, because I saw things from a completely different angle. It was about, First Amendment, free speech in the US, and hard for a European to understand, but it's really about having those discussions. Likewise, when I go to the US, I talk about privacy as being a fundamental right. And so it's really about raising the awareness. My colleagues still use the terms, well, that's GDPR data, isn't it? Say, well, no, that's personal data, the way Nuskin understands it, right? So it's raising this awareness, and that is a struggle, fight, work that we started 4 years ago, and that will never stop.
All right. So as I said, questions and interventions are welcome anytime. I see that we have one coming from online. Irina.
Yes, indeed. So we have a question for Antionetta Rispoli. She's asking, GDPR was designed to protect individuals' data, but privacy terms are so complex that individuals don't pay attention. Don't you think the US way, meaning introducing mechanisms for companies for data usage, would be more effective?
Axel, I see you have a reaction.
Well, first of all, it's a great question because the issue has become very complex. There are different ways to see things. As Laurent was saying, this is a fundamental right. We cannot go away from it. Privacy is the data of me belongs to me. So we have to make sure that we can convey that in a good manner how we would like to use the data. Then there is not always have to use the word consent in the GDPR. You actually have 5 different other legal grounds which you can use inside a contract or legitimate interest. And if you go for legitimate interest, you're getting close to the US model where you can actually ask for, you can have a mechanism to opt out from certain issues. But the main importance here is that you have to be clear and precise, and you have to explain to the individual what you want to use the data and how you want to use it and how it's going to be used. By doing that, we build up trust. And trust is the main capital when it comes to privacy globally. And this is the main thing here. I say that we can use a bit of transatlantic if we start to really understand the nuances of GDPR.
Any other reactions on the question?
Just to add on what Axel just said, it's also, we should also take into account the political context of the different areas of the world. In the EU, it's quite prominent to if I can use the word, empower the consumer, the user, in this sense, not just regarding personal data, but also non-personal data at the moment. So it's a different mindset, if I can use this word. I don't have the answer if one is better or or worse, because if it's all a matter of perspective. But I think when it comes to compliance, you need to take into account the political context, and in this case, it is like that and goes on that direction. And I don't think it will change. So we take it as a fact.
So you mean that the US will, for the foreseeable future, keep looking at companies' interests primarily, and Europe will?
Not necessarily, to be honest, because I didn't mean that. I meant in the EU mostly that there is this concept. I have to admit that we are collaborating a lot with our association in the US that is representing retail, and I think equally in the US as well there is a willingness to understand. So I don't think it's more of awareness. That was a very good point. It's not so much that they decided that they want to just take the company side. It's just there is the need for more awareness of the rules, and because there are a lot of companies that operate across the Atlantic, it's equally important for both sides to understand the mentality and the political context in the different areas. So I think that's what it is.
Okay.
If I may quickly, I think there's a recent case which really illustrates this difference between the US and Europe. And I think the benefits to the consumers in Europe are not seen. What the consumers see is the cookie walls. Say, what the heck, this is annoying. This is GDPR's fault. The reality is that behind the scenes, lots is happening, if companies follow the rules to protect them. So in the US, there's been this case between LinkedIn and IQ, and it was IQ is a people analytics company that was scraping data from LinkedIn, harvesting publicly available information from LinkedIn. And LinkedIn said, well, this is against, my terms of use. You're not allowed to do this. And so the decision, I think, was the LinkedIn lost in the first place. They went an appeal, lost again. And the discussions was not too much centered around privacy, although the question was being asked, what about the privacy rights of the individuals on LinkedIn? And the court said the business interests prevail over those rights. Now, from a European perspective, the question is, well, do you have a legal basis to actually collect this data? And that's what Axel mentioned. So do you have consent from the user that the third party is going to be harvesting that data from LinkedIn? Or, is there a legal obligation for them to do so, and so on and so forth? So in Europe, you can process data to the extent it's permitted by law. In the US, you can do it to the extent it's not declared illegal by law. And so that's really the big difference. So again, I think that in Europe, for the consumers, the benefits aren't hidden, but they're very much present. Now, the problem is that the complexity of the rules mean that it's fairly difficult to comply with GDPR fully. It's a struggle for a company like Nuskin. What about SMEs?
For sure.
So,
and you mentioned that, you and Axel actually, you both mentioned that privacy is about trust. And when preparing this panel together, you mentioned that the way you approach privacy at Nuskin is how do we create trust with our customers. So concretely, give us some very tangible examples of decisions you've made to build trust while implementing a stringent privacy framework.
okay, so I'll start by saying that we still have a long way to go, but one simple thing that companies can do is provide more transparency when collecting the data in the first place. That's not a complex privacy notice, which admittedly nobody really reads, which is really more a sort of check-the-box compliance exercise. But more and more you will see companies having, next to a data field that they request, a small information box that you can click on to understand what will the data be used for. And that provides lots of comfort. For instance, if you purchase products online and they ask you for your mobile phone number, you may question what are they going to do with it. If you just provide a little explanation to say, we're not going to send you any marketing, we will just use it in case we have an issue with your package, that's a way to provide increased transparency. I think personally it's a great CX experience. And I believe that
CX means
customer experience.
Right.
Yeah, so customer experience. And I believe that people would be more willing, I'm not saying that they will, but they would be more willing to provide it to you. So transparency is absolutely paramount. And I'm a lawyer, but I will tell you, do not ask the lawyers to draft that wording. Have the marketing team do it, and then the lawyers revise it, right? But not the other way around.
That sounds like a smart idea. And so, for example, what if I'm designing, I'm in my direct selling company and we're having a meeting, okay, what data do we want to collect? And we are going to do what you suggest, that we explain next to, for example, the date of birth field, why are we collecting this? And I'm thinking, oh, but maybe I don't want my customers to know that.
Well, obviously, and I think that's how many companies have always operated and still operate. You say, well, there's two ways to gather the data. There's either I'm being fully honest and transparent, but then I risk maybe gathering less data, or I'm cheating them. I'm telling them that I'm using this data for purpose A, and then I will reuse it for purpose B. I mean, to give you a concrete example, we have this tool at Nuskin which measures some sort of levels of carotenoid in the skin. Anyways, it's really a marketing tool to provide a money-back guarantee. We scan you, you have a certain score, you use your products. If the score does not increase, we'll pay you back. That's the purpose. Then the teams come and say, well, we have all this amount of data. Can we actually use it to start developing new products, to cross-link the information, to try to draw personas and profiles? Say, well, you could technically because you've got the data, but is that really the expectation of your user? What if they hear about it? Then you can be sure that the trust will be gone. And in today's world, people eventually know what's really happening behind the scenes. So I would say it's better obtain less data, build trust. The more data you gather, because you can gather immediately a lot from the start, but lose it instantly if there is an issue.
Axel, I'll ask you the same question right after, but Savvina, I'm turning to you for now to ask, have you heard of good practices in the retail sector? Not necessarily direct selling, but SMEs, large industrial retail enterprises? In
collecting data or using?
Well, why don't you maybe give us one example for both, collecting and then using?
Well, this is a good question, but can I add a small comment that just came to my mind, and I think it's important. It has to do with also our perception of what the customer, what the user really wants. So there is also a lot of discussions, not necessarily related always with the GDPR rules, but with other, online offering rules that are also on the table at this moment. And there are a lot of discussions on, on what actually the customer want, what exactly what you said now. I mean, if we tell them that we will use this data for, to market similar products or to have more targeted advertising to their needs, and it's always, you hear that they don't. Which I'm not necessarily convinced that it's the case, because customers do appreciate that they have more, targeted advertising to their needs, from products that they have used. So I think also it's very industry specific. The issues should be discussed on a case by case. I mean, it's not the same in the tech sector or in the retail sector or in other sectors. It's different set of data and different kind of processing and different kind of products at the end that they are being used. So I think there is an overall, let's say, confusion of these two things, and we should not. But sorry, that was not your question.
No, it's fine, it's fine. Go ahead. On good practices, I'm not in a position to, release information on the membership, but I know that most of our members, they follow the GDPR rules, but what they have been sharing, and especially for SMEs, is that in certain cases, because it's so complex, and the, let's say, the line on who is responsible, if it's the controller or the processor in each case, it's so hard to define, and they don't have the resources also to show that. In some cases, they might miss some of the rules. But I think in general, the retail sector, and this is something we are extensively discussing with our counterparts in the US as well, is a sector that is really following the rules and also doesn't really receive let's say, requests that, they could potentially, how to say it, lose the trust of the customers. Mm-hmm. Because it's very specific, it's about products, so yes. But so you're saying, so I'm not doubting for a second that, the retail sector respects the GDPR, of course. But have you heard of SMEs, for example, integrating those requirements more efficiently or successfully than others?
No, I don't think I have specific examples on that. I do know that there are, everyone had to comply with the rules. It was not a question of choosing. So in principle, they all should have done that in a way. I know as a fact that it was hard for a lot of SMEs to follow the rules and follow that because they don't have the resources to, for example, if we use the case with the, the decision from the Austrian Data Protection Authority and the French about the use of the Google Analytics tools, the cases that they filed, they were primarily on big retail companies, but a fear, a risk that was discussed was that every individual, small and medium-sized company would use Google Analytics, for example, and they wouldn't know that they would expose their, the data of their customers, because they're not in a position to do all this, let's say, case-by-case assessments and assess everyone in their supply chain if they follow the rules. This is something that takes a lot of resources. I'm sure that they want to, and I know that there are a lot of awareness campaigns and helping tools to do that. So it's not a matter of willingness, it's more of if they are capable to do that in some cases, to really assess everyone.
Okay, thanks. We'll get back to that and what companies in retail can do potentially to get better at GDPR observance. But Axel, in general, have you heard of good practices either from SMEs or from any other type of companies that have successfully implemented the GDPR or that have even used the GDPR and other connected decisions to I don't know, use that as an opportunity to better collect data or better build trust with their customers?
Well, when it comes to direct marketing industry, we are, as you are, always building on trust. And the best thing is for companies to be transparent. We have noticed that if you are transparent, if you're open with what you're going to do with the data, and if you can explain how you use the data, you are actually receiving more information. Or I should say, more correct information. Because if you see to things like, if you don't explain why you're using data, you get a lot of fake ideas and fake numbers and fake email addresses that you cannot use for anything else. For the direct marketing industry, a valid consent to an email address is gold worth, in a sense. So you should always be transparent. And there are companies that have always been very open with how they do it and the best practices like that. Within FEDMA, we have been trying to develop a code of conduct, a pan-European code of conduct, how we can use data within, how to use personal data within the GDPR for all our members. But we're sort of struggling with the concept of that we're trying to negotiate with the data protection authorities. And it's like trying to negotiate with a moving ship. You aim for one part and then they keep on moving forward and then move backwards and you're trying to get where to be. Because as with GDPR, it's a living monster that lives and breathes and moves. So it's not static anywhere. And in a sense, that's a bit of a problem when it comes to the authorities that are regulating this, because they're moving along and then all of a sudden they want us to move along with them. And we're trying to do that. But when we want to move along according to what we think is correct, they say, no. So it's always a give and take. Companies have been doing this fairly well. I can say there is the major brands, that they always get it. SMEs have a big problem here because brands, then you think you can trust. But a small company that you never heard of, you are actually fairly suspicious towards them, usually. And therefore, you need to be even more transparent. I remember when I was working as a lawyer within the Swedish Direct Marketing Association, I had a company that wanted to collect email addresses. And I said, okay, great, let's just tell them what we want to do. We do marketing, we want to use it for this and that purpose. And they said, no, I can't do that. What if they say no? And then I said, then don't do it.
Yeah, it's a pretty healthy compass to follow, right? If you don't want the customer to know, then you're probably in the area where you shouldn't be doing it. Okay.
Exactly. And if you don't do it in the right way, if you don't intend to try to follow the rules, don't go out there because you will shoot yourself in the foot quite badly. And as we said, 4% of your global turnover, well, it's quite a bit.
Yeah. I'm going to ask another question here, but then I'm very curious to know from you all here how data protection and privacy issues have turned up in your work. Okay, so I'll turn to you in just a second, but get thinking. I also wonder if, by any chance, so at Nuskin, for example, having to comply with the GDPR and with any other relevant frameworks outside of Europe, but GDPR being the top one, or the most stringent one, did it create any opportunities? Did you see that as an opportunity to indeed keep building trust, for example, by explaining to your customers why you collect their data in any other ways, potentially?
It can be an opportunity. It can become a differentiator for the industry, for the company. I'm not saying, again, we're there yet, but we're a people's business. Our business is, and we just keep on repeating that same word, but it's just so important. Our business is based on trust. I trust you to recommend products which are great, and I trust you to tell me that these are coming from a great company. And I can trust a company to handle my data properly. And so it's critical, and I believe that it's really important. Shouldn't be a differentiator. Everybody should be, complying and building this trust. The reality is that, again, many companies either don't know, some don't want to, some just can't. And so, yes, it's important. A basic thing, which is less relevant now, but we got a Privacy Shield certification back then, just to say, well, we abide, by the Privacy Shield rules, so the transfer of data between Europe and the US. That's a seal of trust that you can offer to your, to your customers. Now, Privacy Shield, we know, was repealed, was annulled by the Court of Justice, but that was just on the European side. From a US perspective, well, I could consider this is still valid. So the question was, do we maintain our certification, yes or no? And we thought yes, for two reasons. The first one, because we can still say, despite the fact that we know it's not a valid transfer mechanism, it's still showing to our customers that we take this seriously. Second reason is that obviously it will get us a head start once the new framework will be adopted. Exactly. It's going to be easier to switch to the new framework. So yes, again, you know, it's about distinguishing yourselves from bad players. Although everybody should be on the same level playing field, reality is that companies are not.
Right, so you send, keeping up that certification, you're sending the message that you care and you are taking extra steps to protect your customers' data. Great. Let's see, how does privacy and data protection show up in your work? I am not ready to accept silence as an answer.
Meeny, meeny, miny, mo.
There's a gentleman here at the front, Chavon. From Gen Con, I believe, right?
I have a question for Laurent. At Nuskin, have you found data privacy legislation, requirements, driving internal solutions or going third-party solutions one more than the other? How has it impacted just solution strategy for you?
Thanks.
It's difficult. The reality is that as an American-based company, we do rely a lot on third-party vendors, American-based, which then need to develop a solution that's going to work globally. And we realize that many of those vendors must be excluded because they do not have the sophistication required to go globally with privacy-compliant solutions. Now, can we take everything in-house and develop everything in-house? No, we can't. We still need to rely on third-party vendors. However, it happens that sometimes the work that we do hand-in-hand with our business teams, IT developers, and so on and so forth, the in-house development, together with the privacy office, will eventually, lead us to a compliant solution more quickly than if we were to rely on some third-party vendors. Now, there's excellent vendors out there, extremely knowledgeable, extremely sophisticated. But if you look at some niche vendors that could have a really great IT solution, and we talk a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, well, that's a completely different ballgame. And so I won't be able to answer yes or no, it has changed the way we operate. The reality is that it's made it harder to find reliable vendors who can offer us compliant solutions to expand globally.
Sorry, but how is AI a totally different ballgame?
Well, I mean, just consider this one, and don't ask me how to solve it because I don't know, but on AI, you want to avoid bias, right? You want to have an ethical solution which is free from bias. And so to build that, you need to rely on big data. You need to have a tremendous amount of data that you can build into your algorithm. And then privacy says, well, data minimization. You should only process the data which is strictly needed to achieve your purpose. So how do you combine the two? Well, don't ask me. I don't know. And so the point is, if you rely on a vendor, who's really great at AI, but doesn't know a clue about privacy, that question that I just asked, and to which I don't have an answer, it's not even crossing their mind. So obviously, we may run into big troubles when it comes to privacy. And then it comes about the transparency again. And that's going to be one of the main, challenge for those the AI regulation. How do you provide transparency on the algorithm, on how the decision-making process is made? So we're entering into a realm which requires a deep technical knowledge, deep legal regulatory knowledge, and frankly, it's not given to any company to possess that sort of knowledge.
It's a testimony to the complexity of
there
this issue.
There is a new regulation as well, upcoming.
Well, right,
to
yes,
see
exactly.
how will that add to the
end
complexity.
But
AI
it's, it's a complex situation when you ask the lawyer and he says, "Don't ask me, I don't know." That's really worrying. Do we have time for one or two other questions or contributions? Yes, please. Siobhan over there, behind you. Yeah. Thanks, Gabriel.
Hello.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
My name's Ian Cordell. I'm with Flight Commerce.
Thanks.
We offer technology solutions for the industry. So my question is, are you aware of any direct selling companies that have come under enforcement action from the European Union or appropriate governmental agency? And then the second part of that question is, are you aware of any individual direct selling independent distributor that has pursued action against a direct selling company?
Okay, very interesting. Has anyone heard of either case? Okay, not so far.
No.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say no as well, but...
And Axel is shaking his head as well. Just out of curiosity, what would be the scenario in which sorry, yeah, there's the light and it's reflecting. What scenario were you thinking of? I can imagine scenarios in which direct selling companies are being sued under enforcement for these laws.
Well, of course, we're always hearing
one.
about Google and Facebook and these companies being pursued by regulatory agencies in Europe and everywhere else in the world. But we spend an enormous amount of time talking and dealing with privacy issues. But at the end of the day, how many companies are actually being caught up in not complying with these regulations and or being pursued by individuals that these regulations are designed to protect their individual privacy? So I own my data, but I also live in a world where everybody has taken all their clothes off and thrown it on Facebook. So on one hand, the government's trying to put a framework in place to protect my data, but at the same time, not me personally, but the individuals are kind of putting their data everywhere, and with reckless abandon, I would say.
Yeah, that's a very interesting paradox.
I'll tell you this, if I may. I'm not aware of direct selling companies, having been, pursued or by regulators. But our industry has a certain reputation, which unfortunately is not always the most positive one. I don't want to give yet another angle for a disgruntled distributor to come after the company. And so I think that one risk is that a disgruntled distributor that's been terminated for whatever reason might, come after the company using that privacy angle, leading to potentially a bigger investigation by regulators into the way that the company operates. If you look at the US, the FTC, and not sure how that's going to work, but privacy and then everything which is direct selling related is in the hands of the FTC. So a complaint to the FTC, or might lead to an investigation to something which is bigger. And so when we think about our industry, that's something that's really concerning me. It's not too much the angle from the regulator that might say, hey, you didn't delete the data quickly enough, but it's potentially triggering a more and wider investigation into other practices. And that's, I think, one concern that we should keep in mind.
Thanks. Axel, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting question. And the thing is, you don't see so many minor companies, and I have to say that both direct marketing and direct selling are minor when it comes to the global issues, because the data protection authorities, they go for the most buck for the bang, as you say, or the bang for the buck, or whatever it is. Whereas we say up here in Sweden, when the elephant stomps, the rat dances. Because if you do go for one of the major players, and you say they have to abide by this, all the other ones will follow suit. Because if you don't follow suit, you will then be picked upon afterwards. So you don't really see any of the minor companies that are being picked on. And to the second part of it, saying that, we're all throwing our clothes up on Facebook. But the thing is, this is the the GDPR gives us a fundamental right for the use of our data, but with the right comes a duty to read what you actually are signing up for, and that is for all the individuals to start doing. And as a lawyer, you always say, great that people start to read things, but then again, they don't always do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a typically lawyer comment. Thanks very much. Now, I would also add and conclude this panel by saying that when it comes to companies being sued or not under the GDPR, there was a key ruling just 2 weeks ago from the European Court of Justice that stated that consumer associations can now bring collective redress actions under the GDPR on behalf of individuals, even if they don't have a mandate to do so. So until 2 weeks ago, until basically today, consumer associations had to have a mandate to go after companies. Not so anymore. So the landscape may change very much in the next 6 months or so. Anyway, I want to thank very much Axel, Savvina, and Laurent for this panel. Thank you all.